evening from Seattle's Roosevelt Station, and welcome to another transit adventure. And my train is arriving, so I will catch you up more at the next stop. Okay, I made it to Northgate Station and finally have some time to catch my breath. The next ride will be Sound Transit's Route 512 up to Everett. But you're probably wondering why I'm here in the first place, and that is because I'm traveling to Vancouver, BC, entirely via public transit. No Amtrak, Greyhounds, or cars of any sort. The 512 is a Sound Transit express bus route connecting Northgate with Lynnwood and Everett every 10 to 15 minutes, every day of the week. It operates usually using double-decker buses, but because I had some luggage with me, I chose to sit on the lower deck for this ride. The bus makes stops in Montlake Terrace, downtown Lynnwood, Ashway in North Lynnwood, South Everett, and downtown Everett before ending at Everett Station. The total ride is usually about 45 minutes, and it's a pretty smooth one since it's mostly on the I-5 freeway. The route is actually scheduled to be truncated to run only between Lynnwood and Everett in September when the Lynnwood Link extension opens connecting Lynnwood and Northgate stations. I've made it to Everett Station where I now have about 20 minutes until my next bus up to Mount Vernon. It's probably the ride I'm looking forward to the most, and you'll see why in a minute. The bus is supposed to be really nice on the inside, and I enjoy riding Skagit Transit. As for this trip in general, this is my second time making it, but it's something that's been in the making for a while. I've been dreaming of doing this trip since I first found out it was possible back in 2020, and I did it once on a weekday. This is my first time doing it on a weekend. Today is Saturday. It's not possible to do on Sundays, unfortunately, but I am excited to do it today and to get up to Vancouver. Coming to Everett Station is always a bit frustrating because, well, it's a train station, but taking a train here is actually very difficult. There are 2 Amtrak trains a day that come up through here and continue up to Bellingham and Vancouver, and then during weekdays there are 2 round-trip Sounder commuter trains, but beyond that there is nothing, aside from Amtrak's long-distance Empire Builder. So, if you're coming from Seattle, you're probably best off taking the 512. It runs every 15 minutes, it's more reliable, and it's a bit faster than the train too, since the train runs up along the waterfront. The 90X is a quick 40 to 45 minute ride connecting Everett and Mount Vernon, basically non-stop. It serves Everett Station, a few central stops in Everett, and then runs non-stop to South Mount Vernon before ending at Skagit Station. Unfortunately, it's not quite as convenient as the 512. On weekends, it runs roughly every 2 hours and ends at about 4 or 5 p.m., which is less than convenient, but I'm glad that the service exists and runs 7 days a week fairly consistently. So after a quick 90X ride, I am now at Skagit Station, an Amtrak and bus hub in downtown Mount Vernon, Washington. I have about 15 more minutes until my Route 80X bus up to Bellingham arrives, which I will ride all the way up to Bellingham Station in downtown Bellingham. The 80X is a really interesting route because it's operated by 2 transit agencies at the same time. About half the trips are operated by Skagit Transit, which is the local transit agency for Skagit County, where I am right now, and they also operate at the 90X. The other half are operated by Whatcom Transportation Authority, or WTA, which is for Whatcom County, which is where Bellingham and Blaine are located, which you'll see coming up later in the video. I definitely prefer the Skagit Transit buses on this route because they are much more comfortable and have much nicer seats, but it is really interesting to see a route co-operated by 2 transit agencies at the same time. Trip today on the 80X will be on Skagit Transit as they operate most of the weekend service on the route. However, I have ridden it on WTA a few times as well. The 80X is also unfortunately pretty infrequent, running also every 2 hours on weekends and taking about 45 minutes each way between Mount Vernon and downtown Bellingham.
The route is also an express, stopping just at one park and ride in Burlington, a park and ride in Alger, a small town between the two cities, and a park and ride in southern Bellingham before reaching Bellingham Station.
Well, I've made it to Bellingham, and I've stepped away from the bus station a little bit because it gets quite busy there. Bellingham Station is the main hub of WTA's transit operations and sees almost all of their routes serving it, and is really busy because WTA operates a fair amount of service for being a relatively mid-sized transit system. I have just over an hour here in Bellingham, which is my longest layover of the entire trip. This is because the 80X comes every 2 hours, and then my next bus, the 75B, up to Blaine, comes only 3 times a day on Saturdays. The 75B is really the limiting factor of this trip anytime you're going. The main issue is that it doesn't even run Sundays. It runs 3 times a day on Saturdays, and on weekdays it only runs maybe around 10 to 12 times a day. It's a very infrequent route and also very slow. It'll take about an hour and a half to get from here in Bellingham all the way up to Blaine, where the Peace Arch border crossing is. However, despite the lack of frequency, the 75 is a really interesting route and is really an example of WTA's commitment to serving more rural areas such as Blaine, Birch Bay, Sumas, Everson, and so on. There are many smaller towns in Whatcom County, and most of them do have bus service thanks to WTA.
The 75B leaves Bellingham as an express running along I-5 up to Ferndale, before running on local streets and getting back on the freeway to Birch Bay Square. From there, it runs on local roads through Birch Bay, which is really quite scenic and has great water views. However, it really does slow down the trip, adding over 30 minutes onto a one-way trip to Blaine. During weekdays, there's also the 75A service, which operates a few times a day and skips Birch Bay by taking I-5 straight up to Blaine and is a much faster alternative. The 75B has a stop in downtown Blaine at 2nd Street and C Street, which is right next to the entrance for Peace Arch State Park, which is then how you walk to cross the US-Canada border.
So as you can see, I've made it to Blaine and the Peace Arch border crossing. Here is the Peace Arch itself, and I will now be crossing into Canada. I'm obviously not going to film the border crossing because of security reasons, but once I'm in Canada, I will be able to walk about a mile up to White Rock, where I'll catch my next bus, which I'll tell you more about once I get there. So I've made it through the border, and I ate some lunch, and now it's time to walk all the way up about 1 kilometer to the 375 bus, which will take me up to White Rock Center. The 375 is a normal local route, and it's also probably the furthest south in the TransLink system and serves White Rock South, which is pretty close to the border and to the neighborhood of Douglas. The walk itself isn't going to be very pleasant. It's mostly along the side of the highway, but it is what it is, and it isn't too long, so I will see you in White Rock.
Leaving from the Peace Arch border checkpoint, the walk started by walking along a frontage road along the eastern side of Highway 99, which is the main freeway connecting the border to Greater Metro Vancouver. From there, the frontage road turned into a path, which then eventually disappeared, and I had to walk up the side on the shoulder of an exit ramp.
I will say this is my first time doing this on foot and not with a bicycle. And I do think I underestimated the distance a little bit, but I'm almost to the bus stop, so I'll see you guys there. So I made it to the bus stop, and I'm waiting for the 375, which should take me to White Rock Center. From there, I'll catch another bus into Richmond, followed by the SkyTrain into Vancouver, which I'll show you more when I get there. I will say this direction, going north, is a lot easier to do this trip in than going south, simply because the 375 is way more frequent than the 75, and all the buses here run later. So if you're going south, the latest you can leave Vancouver is something like 11 a.m. in order to catch a 75 that makes the 80X, that makes the last 90X into Everett. However, going north, you can get here as late as, I believe, 11 p.m. or midnight and end up catching the 351. and 375 as needed. And then in terms of frequency, the 375 here comes every 20 to 30 minutes, while the 75 down in Blaine comes every 2 hours, or on Saturdays even worse, just 3 times a day. And then the 80 and 90X only come every 2 hours or so as well, which makes that trip a lot less easy to do spontaneously. And of course the border is hard to plan for time-wise, so you do have to be a little spontaneous when you're doing this trip.
Soon enough, the 375 came, and it was just about a 10-minute ride into White Rock Center. While I was riding, I got some urbanist reading done as well.
After a quick ride on the 375, I'm here at White Rock Center, where I'm about to catch Route 351 up to Bridgeport Station. The 351 is kind of like the 512 back in Seattle. It's a regional route, but with pretty frequent service. It runs every 15 minutes most of the time, and runs with double-decker buses usually as well. It's a really nice ride and connects SkyTrain to White Rock, which is a really important connection. It's one of TransLink's busiest regional routes, and I really enjoy riding it.
The 351 is a fairly quick ride, taking about 40 minutes to cover the distance between White Rock Center and Bridgeport Station in Richmond. The route serves local stops through White Rock before getting on Highway 99 and making only 2 stops before Richmond at highway exits with local bus connections.
The 351 ended up being pretty busy and arriving a bit late, but I've made it to Bridgeport Canada Line Station, where I'll now catch the Canada Line into downtown Vancouver. This is my last ride of this whole trip. It's been pretty wild, but this should be one of the easier rides. So I've finally made it to downtown Vancouver's waterfront station, which is Vancouver's busiest transit hub. In total, the journey took about 9 hours because I decided to take a lunch break at the border and because my 351 was pretty late. So it was a bit longer than expected, but overall, not a bad way to spend a day. I really enjoyed it, from being able to spend an hour in Bellingham to the really beautiful 75 and the lovely Peace Arch Park experience near the border. I really enjoyed taking the slower way into Canada and just generally being able to explore and see so much more than I would on any other mode of transportation. I do highly recommend this trip for any of you who are interested and in the area. It does take a long time, but it is really cool and, in my opinion, worthwhile. Now, while I still have you, let's talk about the cost of this trip. I paid $3.25 for my Sound Transit bus, $2 for the 80X, $2 for the 90X, $1 for the 75, and then once I entered Canada, the fare all the way from White Rock to here was $2.55 Canadian. So in total, that's only about $10 US, which is a pretty good deal, and about half of the cheapest coach or train ticket that you could buy between these two cities. So overall, 2 reasons to take this trip: 1, money, and 2, scenery. So if you have some extra time someday and want to take the scenic route, I can't recommend it enough. Thanks for watching.